My mother dropped to her knees between the pastry case and table 7 while somebody's toddler cried over a smashed macaron. That was the first thing I saw. Not her face. Not the customers lifting phones. Not Mateo freezing mid-pour with milk hissing out of the steam wand. I saw her knees hit my flour-dusted tile, and I heard the crack of bone through wool trousers. And for one insane second, I thought she had come to die in my bakery. Then she looked up at me and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Your father signed everything away. If you don't help, your sister loses the house." A tray of apricot deniches burned behind me. Nobody moved. The espresso machine kept breathing. Croissants cooled under a glaze that caught the light like wet lacquer. A woman near the window whispered, "Oh my God," to no one in particular. And 3 phones rose at once. Small black mirrors pointed at the counter I had spent 9 years trying to make sacred. I should tell you I had imagined this moment before. Not this exact one. Never this ugly. But I had imagined my family seeing this place. I had imagined them speechless. I had not imagined my mother on her knees. Lunch rush at Third Rise always came in waves. Office workers first, then mothers with strollers, then students who split one sandwich and stayed too long. By 12:30, the front glass was fogged from the ovens and the rain outside. The room smelled like browned butter, orange peel, and espresso grounds. We had sold out of the pistachio morning buns before noon, and I was in the open kitchen glazing a line of pain suisse while Leela called numbers over the register. Fast hands, hot room, no room for memory. Then Leela's voice changed. It didn't rise. It thinned. "Can I help you?" I looked up because I knew that tone. Customer problem. Something returned. Maybe an allergy complaint. Maybe somebody wanting a wedding consultation without an appointment. I wiped my fingers on my apron, turned toward the counter, and saw a woman standing beneath the menu board with both hands wrapped around a cream leather handbag. My mother always held expensive bags the same way, tight at the handles, like someone might accuse her of not belonging to them. For a second, my brain refused to fit her into the room. She was too polished for it. Camel coat, dark hair pinned back. Lipstick still perfect despite the rain. She looked like the kind of woman who used to lower her voice when saying the word bakery, as if it were contagious. Her eyes found mine. Everything in me went cold so fast it felt clean. Lila glanced back. "Chef, I should have said something calm, professional." Instead, I heard my own voice from far away. "Call security." My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she did something worse. She stepped past the cue rope, past the chalkboard sign for Quince tarts, and before Mateo could come around the machine or I could get from behind the pass, she sank straight down onto the tile. The whole room inhaled. Her coat spread around her on the floor. One knee shifted in flour. Her handbag toppled over, spilling a receipt, a lipstick, a packet of tissues. And there, flashing under the cuff of her sleeve, was a string of pearls around her wrist. Not pearls. That bracelet, small cream beads with a gold clasp. One stone missing near the hinge. I knew it before I knew it. She had worn it the night she packed my clothes into a black contractor bag. She had worn it while folding my shirts too fast, while placing my knife roll on the dining table like evidence in a trial. She had worn it when she held the front door half open and wouldn't meet my eyes as the deadbolt clicked after me. 9 years vanished so hard my hands started shaking. "Please," she said, not to me, to the room, to the phones, to whatever version of me she thought still answered that word. I came around the counter slowly. Every person in line tracked me with the hungry silence people use when they know they are watching something private in public. Leela killed the music. Bad choice. The room got louder without it. Cups, cutlery, steam, rain, ticking the window. "Get up," I said. My mother looked up with wet eyes that would have broken me at 18. At 27, they only made me suspicious. I didn't know where else to go. That was almost funny. There are sentences that sound soft because they hide a knife. That was one of them. Not I was wrong. Not I shouldn't have come. Not I'm sorry for what we did. I didn't know where else to go. Meaning she had tried everywhere else first. I stopped 2 feet from her. Close enough to smell her perfume under the damp wool. It was the same jasmine scent that used to linger in our hallway after she left for parent meetings and graduation dinners and all the respectable events where I was expected to become someone she could describe proudly. "Stand up," I said again. She lowered her voice. It got more dangerous when she whispered, "Your father made a mistake." Behind me, someone murmured, "Should we leave?" No one left. "What mistake?" I asked. Her chin trembled. Practiced or real, I couldn't tell. That was the problem with seeing someone after years of hunger. You don't know if you're reading the person in front of you or the child still trapped inside your ribs. He signed documents he didn't understand. There are debts. Legal people are involved. She reached for my sleeve, then seemed to think better of it. If this becomes public, your sister is ruined. There it was. Not me, not us. My sister. A pressure point selected with care. I looked at Lila. She stood rigid by the till, one hand over her mouth, the other still holding the phone she had never dialed from. Mateo stared at me like he was waiting to see whether I wanted him to drag my mother out or bring her water. On the far side of the glass, a teenager angled her camera higher. I hated all of them for witnessing it. I hated myself more for caring. What do you want? I asked. My mother lifted her face, and I saw it then. The calculation underneath the panic, desperation, yes, but also certainty. She had not come here to confess. She had come because I had become useful. Money? She said first. Plain, quick, almost relieved to say the ugliest word. Then, a lawyer. Today, and your name. Her voice dropped even lower. If you stand with us now, people will behave differently. Us. The old wound opened with such precision it felt rehearsed. Love, and my family, had always sounded like recruitment. I glanced down again at the pearl bracelet, bright against her wrist, and the tile seemed to tilt under me. Flour clung to one bead the way it had clung to my shoes the night I left home, carrying a trash bag and a knife roll. Customers kept filming. Butter cooled on racks. One of the Danish trays behind me started smoking. And all I could think was this. This was how she had finally crossed my threshold. Not to see what I'd built. Not to ask what it had cost. She had come to collect from the son she once threw away. I told Mateo to pull the tray before the whole kitchen filled with smoke. Then I looked at my mother and said, "Start at the beginning." She closed her eyes. Like even now, the truth hurt her less than saying it out loud. She opened her eyes in my bakery, but what I saw was our dining room. Same feeling in my throat, same air gone thin. I was 18 that night, wearing the only button-down shirt I owned that made me look like the son my father wanted to display. My engineering acceptance letter sat framed against the fruit bowl because my mother had decided paper looked more important behind glass. There was lamb on the table, saffron rice, a silver dish of roasted almonds, and a cake from a hotel bakery my aunt said was classy enough for photographs. My father had invited 2 family friends over just to witness it. That was his favorite kind of happiness. The kind with witnesses. He kept filling glasses and saying my exam scores out loud, as if numbers got sweeter each time they were repeated. Rank percentile. Scholarship percentage. Starting salary estimates for graduates from the university. Every figure landed on the table like another brick in the house he believed he had built through me. I smiled when expected. I thanked the aunties. I nodded through the speeches about sacrifice and migration and what children owed the parents who crossed oceans. My mother moved around the table in a navy dress, quiet and efficient, replacing plates, adjusting napkins, keeping everything polished. She barely looked at me, but I took that for emotion. I had already paid the pastry school deposit 3 days earlier. The receipt was folded twice and hidden inside my calculus book upstairs. I had planned to tell them after dinner, or after exams, or after I found a way to say it that did not sound like betrayal. I kept moving the truth forward, hoping it would somehow soften on the way. It didn't get the chance. One of the family friends asked to see my first-year modules. "Let the boy show us the difficult courses," he said, smiling into his tea. My father loved that. He sent me upstairs for my books like I was returning with trophies. I brought down 2 textbooks and set them beside my plate. He picked up the calculus one before I sat back down. Maybe he meant to show the title. Maybe he wanted to read some chapter heading and laugh about how serious my life would become. Instead, the folded slip slid out and landed by his fork. No one moved at first. He frowned and opened it. I knew the exact second he understood what it was. His face did not go red right away. That would have been easier. It went blank. Empty in a deliberate way, like he was clearing the room inside himself before wrecking it. What's this? My mouth dried out so fast I could barely swallow. It's mine. He read the line out loud. The school name, the deposit amount, the start date, a pastry program. One of the aunties gave a confused little laugh. She thought it was a joke. My father did not. He looked at me across the table and said, very softly, "Tell me I am reading nonsense." I remember the clock above the microwave. I remember the shine of oil on the lamb. I remember my mother's hand freezing over the serving spoon. "I was going to tell you," I said. That sentence ended my life as their son in one version and began it in another. My father pushed back from the table so hard his chair legs scraped the floor. "You were going to tell me that after all this, after everything, You want to become. He held up the receipt between two fingers. This, I tried to keep my voice level. I got the acceptance because of my grades. You can still what? He snapped. Throw your mind into an oven. The family friends stared at their plates. My aunt reached for her glass and missed it the first time. I should have lied then. Should have said it was a hobby course. A summer experiment. Anything that sounded temporary. Instead, I felt something ugly rise in me. Not courage, more like exhaustion. I don't want engineering. There it was. The truth sat on the table bigger than the food. My father laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. No, you want applause. You want childish pleasure, sugar, decorations, pretty things people eat and forget. It's not that. He stepped closer. I could smell the anise on his breath. Then explain it. Explain why a boy with your scores wants to work with servants. My ears rang. He didn't stop there. He called Baker's Kitchen smoke. Burned hands. People who clean up after real professionals. He said I wanted to shame him in front of relatives who already looked down on immigrants unless their children became doctors, engineers, lawyers. He said he had not broken his back in a foreign country to raise a son who made party food for rich people. Wasted intelligence, he said, stabbing a finger at my chest. Do you know what that looks like? It looks like ingratitude, dressed up as passion. I looked at my mother then because I still believed, stupidly, that if she spoke, the room might tilt back into place. She said nothing. Her eyes moved from my father to me and away again. She picked up plates. She stacked forks. She cleared lamb fat and rice from the table while my future was being torn open beside the dessert spoons. The silence from her was worse than his shouting. His rage had heat. Hers had consent. Irena says I have real hands for it, I blurted, before thinking. He stared. Who? The chef I told you about, from the hotel workshop. She said I could train. My father slapped the receipt onto the table. So this has already gone far. That was the reveal that changed the room. Not just that I wanted it, that I had moved toward it without permission. He turned to my mother then. Did you know? She shook her head once. Something in me broke and reached for her anyway. Mom? She still didn't look at me. The guests left in a blur of excuses and lowered eyes. Doors opened and shut. Dishes clinked in the sink. My father paced the living room with the receipt in his fist, building his case like a prosecutor who knew the verdict already. He brought up tuition, status, family name, community gossip. Every sacrifice they had ever made became a bill presented at once. Then he gave me the offer that wasn't an offer. You call tomorrow morning. You cancel this stupidity. I will forget tonight happened. Forget? Not forgive. I stood in the hallway with my hand shaking and said no. He went still. Say it again. I did. Quieter this time. No. I think part of me believed there had to be a floor beneath the threat. A point where parents stopped and remembered love. Some line no family would cross over a career. I learned otherwise in less than 10 minutes. My father told me if I left this path, I was still his son. If I stayed on it, I was choosing life without him. He said it like policy, not pain. Then he walked out to the balcony to make phone calls, already converting anger into narrative. I turned to my mother because the house still felt salvageable if she would just say one sentence. Stay tonight. We'll talk in the morning. He doesn't mean it, anything. Instead, she went into my room. At first, I thought she was protecting my things. Then I heard the closet doors. I followed her and stopped in the doorway. She was pulling shirts off hangers with quick, efficient movements, dropping them into a black contractor bag we kept for winter cleanouts. The thick plastic crackled every time it hit the floor. My jeans, socks, 2 sweaters, underwear. No folding now, no care, Mom. She did not stop. You don't have to do this. Her mouth tightened. You made this harder than it had to be. I can still hear how flat she said it. Not cruel, worse. Administrative. She opened my desk drawer, found the knife roll I had bought secondhand with tutoring money, and carried it out to the dining table. She laid it beside the receipt. The knives looked obscene there. Too honest, too sharp. Proof of intent. Like evidence. I stood frozen, watching my life sorted into categories. What could be discarded? What would convict me? What no longer belonged in their house? My father came back in as she knotted the bag shut. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The decision had passed from his anger into her hands, and somehow that made it final. Last chance, he said. I looked at the bag, at the knives, at my mother with that pearl bracelet glowing at her wrist under the kitchen light. Every fear in me shouted the same thing. Say sorry, lie, stay, be loved. But the lie would not come. I won't cancel. My father opened the front door. My mother lifted the bag and set it outside. Then she came back in, placed my knife roll on top of it, and stepped away first. That detail stayed with me longest. Not his hand on the lock. Her stepping back. I walked out because there was nowhere else for dignity to stand. The hallway smelled like bleach and somebody else's dinner. I turned once, maybe still waiting for a crack in the script, some final call of my name. My mother avoided my eyes. The deadbolt clicked, not slammed. Clicked, small sound. Clean sound. Like a decision that had been ready longer than I knew. I stood there with a trash bag full of clothes in one hand and a knife roll in the other, staring at the wood grain of the door, and for the first time in my life I understood that I had not been misunderstood. I had been expelled. And by morning, I had to decide whether that loss was a mistake I could crawl back from, or the price of the only thing I had ever wanted badly enough to keep. That first night I told myself it was temporary. That word can keep you alive for hours. I sat at the bus station with the black contractor bag wedged between my knees and my knife roll under my jacket, zipped so tight the metal teeth pressed into my chin. The fluorescent lights made everyone look sick. A man slept across 3 plastic seats with his shoes off. 2 teenage boys argued over a phone charger. Somewhere nearby, a vending machine hummed like it was the only thing in the building certain of its purpose. I kept checking my screen. No messages, no apology. No sudden burst of reason from behind my parents' front door. Around 2 in the morning, the station guard tapped my shoe with his flashlight and said I couldn't stay if I wasn't traveling. I lied and said my bus was delayed. He asked for a ticket. I showed him the cheapest one I could buy on my phone, leaving in 6 hours for a city I had no plan to reach. He grunted and moved on. I refunded it before dawn and lost the fee. That was the first money I wasted trying to still look like a person with options. The second night, I found a park shelter 3 blocks from the station, a concrete overhang beside a playground that smelled like wet wood chips and beer. Rain tapped the metal roof. I used the contractor bag as a pillow and slept in short, animal bursts. Every footstep on the path snapped me awake. I kept one hand over the knife roll all night, not because I thought someone would steal it, but because touching it reminded me I had chosen something. I was afraid that if I let go, I would wake up and become whatever my father had called me. By the third day, hunger had changed texture. It stopped being dramatic, it got practical. You start calculating in crusts. Half a sandwich now, the other half later. Free samples stretched into a meal. Water first, always. Pride burns quick on an empty stomach. You can feel it leave. I still went to the pastry school office that morning. I stood outside the building and watched students my age move through the glass doors carrying folders and coffee cups and futures that fit inside backpacks. I didn't go in. The deposit I'd fought to protect suddenly looked insane compared to a bed. I walked away before anyone could ask my name and discover I had nowhere to put the uniform. At dawn the next morning, I followed the smell of yeast. That sounds poetic now. It wasn't. It was instinct. Warm bread smells louder when you're hungry. It cut through diesel, rainwater, cigarette smoke, and led me down a side street to a squat corner bakery with fogged windows and a flickering sign that said, "Open 24 hours." Behind the glass, I could see proofing racks taller than I was, sheet pans stacked like armor, and a man in a stained apron hauling flour bags from a van. I stood outside for a full minute, trying to decide how much dignity I could afford to lose. Then I went in. The air hit me first. Heat and sugar and old oil. A radio buzzed from somewhere in the back. The front display held seeded loaves, sausage rolls, jam buns with pink icing. Nothing delicate, nothing curated. This was a bakery built for people coming off night shifts and cab drivers between fares. The man from the van looked at me and said, "We're not hiring front counter. I'll do anything." He gave me a once-ever dress shirt from 3 days ago. Sleep gone strange behind my eyes. One trash bag, one knife roll, clutched too hard. Anything. He said yes. He jerked his chin toward the back. "Talk to Hassan." Hassan was the owner. Thick forearms, gray in his beard, flour ground into the lines of his knuckles. He listened without interrupting while I told the clean version. "Need work, learn fast, can start now." I didn't say I had been thrown out. I said home was complicated. In some neighborhoods that translated well enough, he asked if I had experience. Workshop classes, some pastry basics. He snorted pastry. The word came out like he was naming a hobby. Then he offered me 2 options. Warehouse nights loading distribution crates for a wholesale bread supplier he owned across town. Better pay, shared bed space above the loading dock. Hard labor, but stable. Or prep in the bakery. Worst shift he had. Less money, no place to sleep. Grease traps, dough tubs, tray washing, scaling mixes, cleaning ovens, anything nobody else wanted. He waited maybe 3 seconds before adding, "Smart boys choose warehouse." I looked past him into the kitchen, at the deck ovens, at the benches dusted white, at a woman rolling out dough with both palms like she was pressing weather into it, at the speed, the heat, the life of it. My stomach said bed space. Everything else said bakery. "I'll take prep." Hassan stared at me long enough to confirm I was stupid. Then he nodded once, "Apron there. Start with trays." That was how my career began. Not with art, not with inspiration, with baked-in grease and a steel scrubber shredding the skin around my nails. The trays came out of the sink black with old sugar and carbon. I stood at a deep basin for 4 hours with hot water clouding my face and my shoulders locking from the effort. Then someone shoved a tub of dough at me and told me to portion it by feel. Then another voice barked for me to carry sacks of flour. Then to scrape burnt cheese from sheet pans. Then to unload proofed rolls without collapsing them. Every task came with a new chance to be yelled at. By noon, my shirt was soaked through. Flour had found the sweat at my neck and turned into paste. I burned my left forearm on the lip of a deck oven because I reached too fast. The skin blistered white, then red. Nobody made a fuss. A line cook tossed me a rag filled with ice and said, "Try not to kiss it twice." When the shift ended, Hassan paid me cash for the hours and handed me a paper bag with 2 stale custard tarts inside. "Sell-by was yesterday," he said. "Still fine." I thanked him like he'd saved my life. Maybe he had. I ate one tart sitting on a curb behind the bakery while trucks backed into the alley and beeped in reverse. The custard had skinned over, the pastry was soggy at the base. It was one of the best things I had ever tasted. Not because it was good, because it was mine. I kept coming back. Days blurred into heat, soap, and exhaustion. I learned where to stand so oven doors wouldn't clip my hip. I learned that flour gets into your lungs and stays there, dry and sweet and faintly choking. I learned to score long loaves with a box cutter when the lame went missing, half asleep and praying my hand stayed steady. I learned to smile at the end of shift when someone asked what neighborhood I lived in. Not far, I would say. That became my address. Not far. At night, I rotated between the bus station and the park shelter, too proud to ask coworkers for a couch and too scared to look weak enough to be sent away. I washed my face in gas station bathrooms. I used bakery hand soap on my collar and dried it under the hand dryer. I kept my phone on low brightness to save battery and waited for messages that never came. Then one night, during the worst of it, my phone vibrated in my locker. We were in the middle of a rush for morning bread. The mixers screamed. Someone had called out sick. I had both hands buried in a trough of dough, folding and turning a batch that was too wet and already warming past ideal temperature. My name lit the screen through the locker slats. My sister, not text, a call. I saw it. I heard it buzzing against the metal. I even took one step toward it before Hassan shouted for the sesame trays, and another baker shoved a rack at me with his elbow. The call stopped. I told myself I'd ring back in a minute. A minute in a bakery is a lie. One dough became 2. A rack jammed. The oven needed loading. Somebody dropped a tray of egg wash. By the time I scrubbed my hands clean enough to touch the phone, more than an hour had passed. I called back at once. The line disconnected after half a ring. I tried again. Blocked. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Not unavailable. Not failed. Blocked. I didn't know if she had panicked and changed her mind. If my father had taken the phone. If my mother stood there listening while my name disappeared from her recent calls. I only knew one thing with certainty. Even when my family reached toward me, I was now the kind of person who could miss it because his hands were in dough. The next morning, I burned my other arm on the oven and didn't even feel it until lunch. That scared me more than the pain, because by then, the dream had stopped being a dream. It was rent I couldn't pay. Skin I was losing. Calls I could not get back. And still, before dawn the next day, I went back through the bakery door. I lasted 3 weeks before someone noticed I wanted more than survival. Until then, I was useful in the ways kitchens always need. Strong back, fast hands, no complaints. I came early, left late, and never said no unless the task involved stealing. Even then, I hesitated long enough to disappoint myself. The bakery had a divided heart. Bread in front, pastry in the back left corner, separated by a marble bench older than most of the staff and a mood everyone respected without discussing. That corner belonged to Irena. I learned her name from whispers first. Not because she was loud, because everyone else lowered their voices around her. She was somewhere past 70, narrow as a blade, with silver hair pinned into a knot that never loosened and forearms marked by old burns turned pale with time. She wore no jewelry, no perfume, just a starched jacket and a look that could reduce a grown man to apology. Her station was always colder than the rest of the room. Butter trays nested in ice, metal rulers, bench scrapers lined by size, a block of dark chocolate shaved so clean it looked machined. If the front bakery smelled like comfort, Irena's corner smelled like discipline. For days, I only watched her in fragments. She rolled dough with short, exact strokes. She tapped the edge of a tart ring once to settle it. She cut millefeuille sheets with a ruler and never once glanced at the blade. Young bakers from other places sometimes came by just to greet her, and every single one stood straighter when she turned. I thought she hadn't noticed me. Then Hassan told me to help on pastry because someone had called in sick and the old dragon prefers silence to incompetence. That should have warned me. My first task was croissant dough. Not shaping, not even full lamination. Just moving chilled blocks from the lowboy, dusting the marble lightly, and keeping the bench clean while one of the pastry assistants folded. I tried too hard to be invisible. That is its own kind of clumsiness. My hands hovered. I overfloured the bench. I touched the dough more than necessary. Irena said nothing for 20 minutes. Then the assistant stepped away to the freezer, and I made the mistake of trying to fix a distorted edge before anyone asked me to. I squared the dough, rolled too soon, pressed too hard. I knew I'd ruined it the second the butter broke. A pale crack spidered under the surface. One more pass and the layers smeared. Not catastrophic, not salvage-proof, but damaged in a way you could taste later even if customers couldn't name it. Tight crumb, blunted rise. A croissant that looked acceptable and ate dead. I froze with the pin in my hands. Irena didn't shout. Somehow, that was worse. She came beside me, pressed one finger to the dough, then looked at me as if I'd lied to her personally. Again? I can fix again. Her accent flattened the word into command. She scraped the whole slab aside, cut a fresh portion, and dropped it on the marble between us. You roll like you are punishing it. I felt heat climb my neck. Sorry, I did not ask for apology. I asked for control. Then she moved me an inch to the left. Butter is 19 degrees. Your hands are too hot. Your panic is hotter. I don't know why that landed so hard. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because she said it like temperature, not character. From then on, she corrected everything. Too much flour on the bench, too little rest between turns. Shoulders too high, wrists too stiff, knife angle sloppy. Egg wash pooling at the base. She cared about details so small they felt personal. She'd stop me to adjust how I held a scraper. She'd make me re-roll scraps not because the result mattered, but because waste made the body careless. Again became the rhythm of my nights. Again on Danish folds until the corners matched. Again on pâté sucré until it lined the ring without shrinking. Again on shoes until each piped shell held the same stubborn little peak. If I moved fast to impress her, she slowed me down. If I slowed down to be careful, she accused me of thinking too loudly. Once she slapped the back of my wrist with a folded towel because I dusted icing sugar before a tart was fully cool. It melts, she said. I know. You know after. I need before. No one in that bakery worked me harder. And still, I kept volunteering for her station. Partly because I was learning, partly because pain felt familiar. If a person only gives you attention through correction, your body starts reading severity as interest. I understood that language. I knew how to survive inside it. Then one night, she did something that unsettled me more than cruelty. She praised me. Not directly, just enough to ruin my sleep. I had shaped 48 croissants under her stare, and she lifted one, weighed it in her palm, and said to no one, "At least he can count." The others laughed. I flinched. Small movement. Almost nothing. But Irena saw it. Her eyes flicked to my face and stayed there half a second too long. She said nothing then. She said nothing later. But from that night, she began watching not only my hands, she watched what happened when anyone was kind. A line cook gave me a coffee once and said, "You earned it." I said, "Too fast, I can pay you back tomorrow." Irena heard. Another time, Hassan grunted that I was becoming less useless. Everyone smirked. I nearly dropped the tray I was carrying. She heard that too. A week later, while we were cutting puff pastry lids, she asked, "Who taught you that praise is a trap?" I sliced my finger on the wheel cutter. The blood came up bright and immediate. "No one," I said. She handed me a towel without looking at the cut. Liar. That was all. But the question stayed under my skin. Winter deepened. I moved from the park shelter to a narrow mattress in a room above a corner shop after one of the bakers heard me coughing in the alley and realized I was sleeping outside. It cost almost everything I made. It still felt like luxury. 4 walls, a lock. A hot plate that tripped the fuse if I used it with the lamp. I kept my knife roll under the bed and woke at every creak, but I could finally sleep flat. And because I was no longer freezing through the night, I got better. Not good, better. I learned to read dough by shine and drag. I learned the difference between butter that bends and butter that breaks. I learned that croissant dough doesn't forgive vanity. The honeycomb inside has to be earned in silence, in patient folds and long rests, in not touching what does not need your fingerprints. One stormy night, the pastry assistant didn't show. Flooded train lines, no backup. Orders due by morning. Irena looked at the board, then at me. Stay, I stayed. We laminated until midnight, shaped until 2, baked test trays at 3, rejected them at 3:30. Too tight, again. Too pale, again. The marble table numbed my wrists. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. More than once I thought of saying I couldn't. More than once I thought of the warehouse job Hassan had offered me, warm and simple and free of this humiliation. Instead, I rolled again at 5:10. The final tray came out. The croissants were small crescents of lacquered gold, their layers lifting clean. The seams tucked, the color even from tip to belly. Irena tore one open while it was still too hot, steam ghosting into the cold room. I leaned in and saw the interior. Not perfect, but close enough to hurt. A honeycomb crumb, open cells, fine walls, life inside it. I waited for correction, for the tiny flaw she would use to drag me back to earth. She set the half croissant down and reached into the drawer for a rubber stamp used to mark parchment batches. Usually it carried the bakery code. That morning, she slid the ink pad toward me and nodded at the blank edge of the sheet. Initial it? I thought I'd misheard her. What? This tray? You touched every stage. Initial it? My hand did not move. She made a sound of impatience. If you act like a thief when good work is yours, people will let you live like one. I took the stamp. My fingers shook enough to blur the first letter, so I turned the parchment and tried again with a cleaner corner. 2 small initials in blue ink. Mine. Irena watched the mark dry. Then she said, quietly enough that the mixers nearly swallowed it, "Dough remembers rough hands. So do people." For a second I thought she meant the butter, the pressure, the overhandling. Then I looked at her and understood she had seen much more than my technique. That frightened me. Approval I knew how to chase. Being witnessed was another matter. The sky outside the back door had just started turning from black to iron gray. Morning staff would arrive soon. Customers would come in asking for warmth and sweetness and never know how much of both had to be fought for. I stood there with flour in my cuticles, burn marks on both arms, and my initials drying on bakery parchment like proof that I had been there. It was the first time someone saw what I could become and did not speak as if they owned the results, which should have felt safe. Instead, it made me want more. Wanting more turned out to be expensive. Not just in money, in imagination. Once you have your initials on parchment, you begin making private bargains with yourself. If I get good enough, they will have to see it. If I make something undeniable, maybe the argument changes shape. Maybe talent can cross a threshold shame could not. Maybe a mother can taste what she refused to understand. That was the kind of stupidity I carried for years. By then, I had moved through the bakery hierarchy the way bruises change color, slowly, painfully, first prep, then shaping, then actual pastry hours under Irena when business allowed it. I still did the ugly jobs. Burnt trays, broken mixers, emergency stock runs, but I was learning how to build things with delicacy, and that changed the way I held myself on the street. Hunger leaves one kind of posture in the body. Craft leaves another. My sister found me in the middle of those years. Not in person, not bravely, in a message sent from an account with no profile picture and a name made of random letters. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Is this still your number? I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. Yes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back. I heard you're baking professionally now. Not chef, not pastry work, not congratulations. Baking professionally, like she was checking a rumor with careful fingers. One typed and erased 6 different answers. Landed on, I work at a bakery. Another pause. Then, I need a favor. Secret. That word secret did more damage than any greeting could have. It told me exactly where I still ranked in the family structure. Useful only off. Still? I said yes. It was for a family milestone. A formal dinner for my grandparents' anniversary. Big enough for relatives. Small enough to control. She said there would already be catering, already a hotel cake, already too much polished nonsense. She wanted one thing in the room that felt real. Can you make something small? She wrote. Not for everyone, just for us. I want one honest thing there. Us. Another dangerous word. I should have asked why she wouldn't tell them. I should have asked whether our parents knew she was contacting me. I should have asked whether this was kindness or guilt. Instead, I asked about flavors. She answered immediately, something not too sweet, something elegant, something you'd make. That last line stayed with me all week. Something you'd make. I spent money I did not have on that cake. Not because the ingredients demanded it, though they did. Good chocolate, proper butter, ripe pears, sheet gelatin, vanilla that smelled dark and floral the second the pod split open. I spent because I wanted precision. Not just delicious, persuasive. A cake that could sit quietly in a room, full of family politics, and still make everyone stop after the first bite. I built a pear and brown butter and trim it with layers I could feel in my bones before I poured them. Almond sponge soaked with cardamom syrup, pear confit cut into exact cubes so the knife would pass clean. Brown butter mousse whipped, just shy of too airy. A mirror glazed the color of deep amber. Around the edge, I set a narrow collar of tempered chocolate, brushed with a matte streak so it looked like silk under low light. Irena watched me work and pretended not to. When she finally spoke, it was only to say, "This is too much labor for people who have not earned it." I kept smoothing the glaze. "It's for my sister." That was all she needed to know. She snorted softly and handed me a finer sieve. I boxed the cake in the plainest white carton I could find because anything branded felt too needy. Then I tied the box with kitchen twine so it wouldn't slide in transit. I changed in the bakery bathroom before leaving. Clean shirt, dark trousers. The same careful dressing I had worn the night I was expelled, though I told myself I hadn't noticed that. The venue was a rented hall attached to a community center my parents loved because it could look expensive in photographs if the lights stayed dim. I wasn't invited through the front. My sister texted instructions to the side entrance near the catering vans. That should have told me everything. Instead, it made me hopeful. I arrived carrying the cake flat on both palms like an offering. Through the propped open service door, I could hear cutlery, microphones, laughter sharpened for guests. The air smelled like steam table rice, perfume, and those artificial floral centerpieces that never quite hide the scent of hot banquet carpet. My sister met me in the corridor by the stacked chairs. For a second, we just stared. She looked older, of course, more polished, hairpinned, dressed too formal for comfort. But there were still pieces of the girl who used to leave me the crispy rice from the bottom of the pot because she knew I liked it. Her eyes filled before mine did. "You came," she said. I almost laughed. "You asked." She reached for the box, then stopped. "No, you bring it." She hesitated. "I wanted them to see it came from you." That sentence fed every bad hope I still had. Maybe she had told our mother. Maybe our mother had softened. Maybe years had done what arguments could not. Maybe success, even borrowed and half hidden, had become respectable enough to enter the room. "Does Dad know?" I asked. My sister looked over my shoulder instead of at me. "Just come in before they start speeches." Not an answer. The side corridor opened near the back of the hall, behind a decorative screen wrapped in fake ivy and fairy lights. I stepped into warmth and noise and too many faces from a life I had not been allowed to keep. Relatives turned, some recognized me immediately and masked it badly. Others took a second, then lifted brows the way people do when scandal ages into gossip. My mother stood near the head table in a pale gold sari, speaking to one of my aunts. She saw me. The color drained from her face, then returned in a rush I mistook for feeling. She did not come toward me. I walked to her anyway, the cake box cooling my palms through the cardboard. "Mom." She looked at the box first, then at me. No embrace, no scene. Just a quick glance around the room to see who had noticed. "You shouldn't have come through here," she said under her breath. My sister cut in. I asked him. My mother pressed her lips together. "This is not the time." I waited for the next line. The human one. "How are you? You look thin. You look well. Anything." Instead, she said, "Put it in the kitchen for now. Kitchen, not table. Not dessert course. Storage, still." I nodded. Because hope can survive on crumbs if you let it. I followed a server toward the prep area off the hall. Halfway there, my father stepped out from behind a partition, adjusting his cufflinks, and saw the box in my hands. He stopped walking. The server stopped too. My father looked from my face to the twine around the carton, then to the faint smear of amber glaze on my thumb I had somehow missed. Recognition arrived all at once, and with it, disgust. What is that? No point lying. A cake? For whom? My sister answered before I could. For Nana and Dada. My father's expression changed from anger to insult, which was worse. Anger has motion. Insult just stands there and judges. No, the word landed clean. My sister tried to smile. It's small. Just after I said no, he looked at the box again as if it had leaked. I will not have staff food at a family celebration. The server vanished. Smart man, my skin went cold all over. Exactly the way it had in my bakery when my mother said money first. The phrase itself wasn't new. Staff food. He had called my work servants labor before. But hearing it here, in my hands, while I stood dressed like a guest and carrying 6 hours of precision, that did something different. I made it, I said, hating how much it sounded like pleading. Yes, he said, that is the problem. People had begun to notice. An uncle drifted near with a plate in his hand, pretending he needed more napkins. 2 cousins watched openly from the drinks table. My mother appeared at the edge of the corridor, not close enough to interrupt, only close enough to witness. My sister whispered, please, just let it stay in the back. My father didn't look at her, he looked at me. You enjoy this? He asked quietly. Arriving like this, forcing everyone into discomfort so you can make a point. That rearranged the whole scene at once. In his version, I was not the son bringing dessert. I was the disruption. I was asked to come. He gave a short, ugly smile. You always choose difficult roads, then act surprised by where they lead. My mother finally spoke. Soft voice, eyes on the floor. You made this harder than it had to be. There it was. Not we, not your father. Not what happened years ago. Me, my choice, my difficulty. Even now, standing there with a cake balanced between us, like proof of both care and exclusion, she still believed the original problem was my refusal to become someone easier to display. My uncle stepped forward then, all false helpfulness. Let's not create a scene. He took the box from my hands before I realized I had let go. For 1 second, I thought he meant to save it, put it aside, diffuse the moment. Instead, he carried it to the catering station, lifted the lid, muttered, too fancy for this anyway, and tipped the whole entremet into a tall black trash bin lined with clear plastic. I heard the cake hit the side before it collapsed. A wet, dense slap, then the softer slide of mousse and glaze giving way under banquet heat and gravity. The chocolate collar snapped, pear compote bled into coffee grounds, paper napkins, squeezed lime wedges, and a mound of scraped gravy skin. Nobody gasped. That was the cruelest part. Relatives looked away with the disciplined blindness families use when power is doing something ugly in plain sight. My sister covered her mouth. My mother stood very still. My father adjusted his cuff again, as if a minor housekeeping issue had been resolved. I stared into the bin long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, and still no one stopped me. Amber glaze clung to the liner in a slow drip. 6 hours. My week's savings. Every layer intact, enough to matter a moment before. Something in me wanted to reach in and lift it back out, as if skill could survive contempt if handled carefully. Instead, I stepped back. My father said, if you want to remain here for your grandparents, keep this quiet. Remain, not stay. I looked at my sister. She was crying now, silently, furious with herself for inviting me and too trapped to say it. I looked at my mother. She would not meet my eyes. So I understood, finally, what the invitation had really been. Not return, not repair. A secret convenience. A son through the side door. I left without saying goodbye to anyone important enough to matter. Out in the service alley, the night air smelled like wet concrete and fryer oil. I stood there with empty hands, fingers still curved from carrying the box, and felt the last foolish version of hope bleed out of me. When I got back to the bakery before dawn, Irena took one look at my face, handed me an apron, and said, good, now you know. Then she pointed to the marble and told me to start the puff pastry from scratch. I did know after that. Not all at once, not nobly, but enough. Once you've watched your father let your work hit a trash bag liner, a certain kind of fantasy dies clean. I stopped imagining a dessert could convert anyone. Stopped dressing hope up as proof. The need to be seen didn't vanish, but it changed jobs. It stopped facing home and started facing forward. That made me more useful in the bakery and more dangerous. Irena noticed first. You've stopped begging with your eyes, she said one morning while checking the lift on a tray of kugenamen. I wasn't begging. She pressed a thumb into a corner and frowned at the caramelization. Good. Then whatever was worse than begging has ended. In the months after the family dinner, she pushed me harder than ever. Not warmer, harder. She gave me components instead of whole tasks. Then whole tasks instead of scraps. A fruit tart for service. The hazelnut decoys for weekend orders. Plating tests for a hotel client Hassan wanted to impress. When she corrected me now, it felt less like swatting and more like sharpening. I moved differently too. I slept in the room above the corner shop with enough regularity to call it mine. I bought one decent pair of clogs. I saved in an envelope hidden inside an old flour sack. Not much, never enough, but enough to begin asking a forbidden question in secret. What would it take to work for myself? I didn't say that aloud. Not at first. Kitchens hear ambition like threat. Owners hear it like theft. Even I heard it as blasphemy. People like me were supposed to survive inside someone else's system and call that gratitude. Then a flyer went up in the break area for a young pastry competition. Regional finalists, judges from hotel groups and restaurant groups, small cash prize, stage exposure, a chance at apprenticeships and industry. Placements that sounded glamorous. If you hadn't spent enough time in those kitchens to know better, most of the staff laughed it off. Too polished, too pretentious, too much unpaid labor for one afternoon of applause. I stood staring at the flyer while my coffee went cold. Irena came beside me without a sound. You want to enter. It wasn't a question. I can't afford the ingredients. She tore the flyer down, folded it once, and tucked it into my apron pocket. That was not your objection. The competition theme was reinterpretation. Classical structure, personal voice. Exactly the kind of phrasing judges love because it means everything and nothing. I worked on it after shifts, in scraps of time, borrowing corners of the cold room and writing ratios on the backs of delivery invoices. Irena chose the direction before I finished pretending it was my idea. Milfea, she said. That's not original, neither is butter. Use your brain. She wanted plum and tarragon. Late-season fruit cooked down until it held shape but still bit back. Tarragon steeped so carefully it haunted rather than announced itself. Rough puff turned into disciplined layers. Cream light enough to move, stable enough to stack. It was not the kind of dessert that impressed stupid people. That was why she liked it. We tested versions for 2 weeks. Too wet again, too sweet, again. Tarragon too loud, again. Plum too timid, again. The final version looked almost severe. 3 bands of caramelized pastry, plum compote tucked with military precision. Tarragon diplomat cream piped in ribs so sharp they caught the light. On top, shards of candied plum skin and a dusting of freeze-dried fruit that stained the fingertips if you touched it. When it worked, the first bite cracked, then dissolved, then came back green and dark at the very end. I had never made anything that felt more like a dare. The day I submitted the entry photo, Irena said, "If you win, do not become unbearable. If I lose, become useful." That was as close as she came to good luck. I made the finals. The email arrived at 4:13 in the morning while I was scaling croissant dough. I read it twice, then once aloud in the walk-in because I didn't trust my own eyes. Finalists invited to present live, judges tasting, press attendance. My hands shook so badly I overweighed 3 blocks of butter in a row. Hassan looked annoyed when I told him. Then he grunted and said he could spare me the day if I covered 2 extra shifts that week. High praise from him. The rest of the staff treated me differently at once. Not with admiration exactly. More with the wary respect kitchens reserved for the possibility of escape. People asked what I was making. They offered opinions I had not requested. One line cook said, "Don't forget us when you become TV pretty." Another said, "Competitions are for psychopaths." Irena said nothing at all. That should have warned me. 3 days before the final, she didn't come in. At first, nobody panicked. She had worked through fevers before. Through a split fingertip. Through a fall on wet tiles that left her limping for a week. We assumed she was being dramatic in private. By noon, Hassan was calling. By 2, he had gone himself. He came back without flour on his coat. That was the first sign. The second was how carefully he set down his keys. She died in her sleep, he said. Nothing moved in the kitchen after that. Not truly. Machines still ran. Timers still beeped. Bread still had to come out of ovens because bread does not pause for grief. But every person in that room became half speed, as if the air had thickened. I waited for disbelief. It didn't come. Some losses arrive, already shaped like truth. Hassan handed me a paper envelope before service ended. She left instructions, My name was written across the front in Irena's cramped block letters. Inside was a note, folded around a bank book, and one object so familiar my throat closed the moment I touched it. Her rolling pin, worn smooth at the handles, one tiny burn mark near the center, the wood darkened by years of butter and pressure and hands that never wasted movement. The note said, "Open your own oven before they bury you in theirs." Below that, smaller, "Stop waiting for permission." The bank book showed a sum that made no sense to me at first because I couldn't connect it to her. Irena had lived modestly, almost harshly. But there it was. Not riches. Not rescue forever. Just enough money to matter and not enough to save me from choosing wrong. I sat on an overturned flower bucket in the back alley and cried with the rolling pin across my knees like a child. Not because she died, not only that, because she had seen me planning a future I had barely admitted to myself, and she had acted on it before I could ask. She had chosen me in advance, left proof. That kind of faith can feel like warmth if you're healthy. To me, it felt like pressure. Another dead person handing me a door and trusting me to walk through it alone. The competition happened anyway. I nearly withdrew. Hassan told me not to be an idiot. She'd haunt the refrigeration if you wasted the spot, he said. So I went. I plated the plum tarragon millefia under stage lights that made butter, sweat, and hands look guilty. Judges proud, cameras clicked. Someone next to me torched meringue too long and filled the room with burnt sugar. I heard my heartbeat louder than the audience. I plated one portion crooked, cursed under my breath, reset, and finished with 32 seconds left. I did not win. Second place, the kind of result respectable people call impressive and hungry people call almost, but my name was printed in the program. A food blog mentioned my dessert by name. One judge handed me a card and said, "You have restraint." In the same tone another man might have used to say handsome. For the first time, my work existed somewhere outside the bakery walls and my family's contempt. That should have made me feel bigger. Instead, it made me aware of scale. Second place would not buy security. The bank book could. For 4 nights, I ran numbers in my room above the shop. Apartment deposit on one side of the paper. First and last month's rent. A bed not crawling with springs. A legal address. Safety, quiet, maybe even enough space for a proper work table. On the other side, I wrote stall costs. Market lease, permit fees, insurance, borrowed fridge rental, folding display table, packaging, initial ingredients. Butter alone looked like an insult. Good butter always does. The apartment figures felt adult, responsible. The stall figures looked like grief wearing a business plan. I took the papers to Hassan, though I don't know why. Maybe I wanted someone to forbid it. He studied both columns while eating a sesame bun over the sink. If you ask me what is sensible, apartment, I nodded. He took another bite. If you ask me what you will regret not trying, stall. That was the only advice he gave. The market lease office smelled like old printers and wet coats. The woman behind the desk wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke to me as if failure were a normal part of the process, which somehow made signing feel more terrifying. I used almost all of Irena's money for the deposit and first fees. My hand cramped halfway through the paperwork. At the line for business name, I paused longer than I had over any legal sentence. Third, rise. Not first proof, not second. The rise after damage. After collapse. After you punch the air out and wait and trust the yeast to work again. I wrote it down before I could get embarrassed. The stall itself was barely wider than 2 outstretched arms, tucked near the produce entrance of a weekend market that flooded if it rained hard. My fridge was borrowed from a deli owner who liked my laminated pastries and charged me less because his daughter wanted to study design instead of accounting. I hand-lettered menu cards at midnight on thick cream stock because printed ones cost too much. The first morning, my cash float fit in a biscuit tin. The butter invoice made me laugh out loud from panic. Nothing about it looked inevitable. That was the point. I stood behind that narrow counter before dawn, setting out cardamom buns and plum galettes and 6 perfect croissants made with the last of my courage, and understood the goal had finally changed shape. I did not just want to be a baker anymore. I wanted a door no one else could lock me out of. Owning a door turned out to mean paying for every hinge. The first month at the market almost killed me in ways that looked boring on paper. Not dramatic ruin, arithmetic ruin. Rain on Saturdays, wind on Sundays. A generator failing 10 minutes before opening. A tray of kuanamen overproofing because the market hall heaters stuck on overnight and turned my borrowed fridge into a humid apology. Customers loved the idea of artisan pastry right up until weather made them stay home. I sold out once in the first 3 weeks. The rest of the time, I carried leftovers back in plastic crates and turned them into staff meal. Discounts, scraps, anything except waste. Waste felt like blasphemy when butter cost what it did. Every invoice arrived looking offended. Flour rose, eggs rose. Good chocolate rose so high I began cutting menu items before customers had a chance to love them. The butter supplier cut my credit on a Wednesday. No warning beyond a tired email and a voicemail from a man named Graham who spoke as if he were discussing whether or not the thin membrane between me and collapse, need payment, cleared before next delivery mate. Nothing personal. Everything was personal. I counted the cash tin 3 times that night under the stall light while the market cleaners dragged bins past my feet. If I paid butter, I missed rent on the room above the shop. If I paid rent, I downgraded ingredients and became the kind of bakery I had built. Third rise, specifically not to become cheap, fat, false vanilla. Corners cut where customers could not name the loss but would feel it anyway. I paid the butter, then I started skipping meals with the neat, self-flattering discipline of a man who calls hunger strategy. Coffee in the morning, maybe a broken pastry edge by noon, water after that. If I got dizzy, I told myself it was the heat from the ovens in the commissary kitchen I rented overnight. By the second week of that nonsense, my hands shook while I glazed tarts. I blamed the cold. No one believed me. Lila arrived during one of those mornings. She was 19, maybe 20, with cropped hair, a green market apron she'd dyed darker with coffee to hide stains, and the kind of direct stare only very young people and very old women can carry without apology. She had bought one cardamom bun the week before, then another, then came back not to order but to ask if I needed help closing. I can pay cash, I said immediately. She shrugged. Didn't ask that. That should have made me send her away. Instead, I asked if she'd worked food before. Diner, tea shop, one bad season at a cupcake place run by a woman who cried into fondant. Can you move fast? Can you train? That answer earned her one trial shift. She was not polished. She wrapped boxers crooked and forgot to rotate the frangipane tarts so the shiny ones stayed in front. But she listened. Really listened. And when I corrected her, she did not fold in on herself or perform hurt. She adjusted and kept going. By the end of the day, she had memorized the prices, stopped overhandling the pastries, and suggested moving the laminated display nearer the aisle, because people buy with their eyes before they buy with their stomachs. She was right. That frightened me more than incompetence would have. Belief from strangers is one thing. Belief from someone whose rent might one day depend on your decisions is heavier. I knew exactly how easy it was to build your life on someone else's certainty and call it structure. I told her I could only afford 2 shifts a week. She said, fine. Then she stayed an extra hour unpaid to help me scrape caramelized sugar off sheet pans with a fish spatula because the commissary sink backed up and the market closed late. I told her to go home 3 times. She kept working. At the end, she held up a kuanamen and said, "These are stupid good." I almost snapped at her. Not because she was wrong, because the compliment arrived with future in it. And future meant payroll. Responsibility. Someone watching me the way I had once watched Irena and Hassan and every person who controlled whether I ate. Don't work for free, I said. She looked at me strangely, then make enough to pay me. Simple sentence, brutal sentence. I lay awake that night doing numbers again. A second pair of hands increased output. Increased output required more ingredients. More ingredients meant deeper risk if foot traffic died. Everything connected to everything, and every solution came with another invoice attached. Then the city food critic came by in the rain. I didn't know who she was. Not then. She wore a navy raincoat and held her umbrella like she resented needing it. She bought 1 cardamom kuanamen, 1 plum galette, and asked if the laminated dough was cultured butter or standard. No one asks that unless they care or want to expose you. Cultured? I said. She bit into the kuanamen while standing there, flakes falling onto her sleeve. Her eyebrows lifted 0.5 millimeter. Then she nodded once, almost to herself, and walked away without giving me the relief of a reaction. By close, I had forgotten her. The post went up at 6:17 the next morning. Leela found it first because she was younger and therefore more connected to the machinery of hype. She arrived at the stall, breathless, phone in hand. Did you see this? I hadn't. The critic had posted 1 photo. Just one. A tight shot of the kuanamen torn open under natural light, the crumb honeycombed and glossy. Sugar shell shattered at the edges, cardamom sugar catching in the seam. She wrote 4 lines. Not many. Enough. Best thing I've eaten at the market this year. Third, rise. Go early. The laminated crumb is absurd. Worth standing in weather for. The word absurd did more for me than any award ever had. By 8:30, the line wrapped past the mushroom vendor and curled around the flower stalls. By 9, I had sold out of the Kui Namen. By 9:15, people were angry there weren't more. A man in a camel coat tried to buy the display sample. Someone asked if I took pre-orders. Someone else asked if I had a shop. 2 girls photographed every tray before choosing. The mushroom vendor started sending people my way in exchange for coffee and a morning bun. Leela ran boxers. I glazed. We moved without speaking because there was no time to narrate survival. The generator sputtered once and I nearly blacked out from panic. It held barely. Around 11, a blogger arrived. Around noon, someone from a wedding planner account messaged asking about dessert tables. By 1, my hands smelled like sugar and cardboard and adrenaline. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I kept waiting for the reason it wasn't real. The batch failure. The bad review. The typo in the account. The revelation that everyone had meant another bakery with a similar name. Scarcity can train your nervous system so thoroughly that relief feels like a trick. Still, money is money, even when your fear refuses to enjoy it. The weeks after the post became a blur of early sellouts and impossible restocks. I hired Lila for real. Minimal hours. Embarrassingly small paycheck at first. I apologized when I handed it over. She looked offended and said, "This is called a job." Orders multiplied. So did mistakes. We ran out of boxes and wrapped pastries in plain parchment one Sunday while people pretended the rustic look was intentional. The fridge failed and I lost 2 trays of vanilla diplomat cream. My oven rental costs climbed because I needed more nighttime production. Butter invoices got bigger. Success did not remove pressure, it sharpened it. Growth is just hunger, wearing nicer shoes. Then the bank called, I assumed overdraft issue. Or some clerical error from the business account. Instead, a representative asked if I had considered expansion financing given my recent revenue pattern and local press attention. I almost hung up on him. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a glass office across from a loan officer with neat cufflinks and excellent teeth while he complimented my margins and referred to my brand identity. He used words like trajectory and scalable. I nodded as if I belonged there. My thighs stuck to the chair from stressed sweat. On the table between us sat a folder with projected numbers for a brick-and-mortar lease not far from the market. I had walked past that empty shop for months. Narrow frontage, good morning light. Enough backspace for proofing racks if arranged carefully. Too expensive for fantasy. Suddenly, not impossible. Leela said, "You have to do it." Hassan, when I asked him, said, "Market fame evaporates. Walls matter." Irena wasn't there to weigh in. That absence sat in every decision like an unpaid debt. I visited the shop 3 times before making an offer. The first time, I found flaws. Plumbing concerns. Uneven flooring. Ventilation that would need work. The second time, I stood in the front room after the agent left and listened to the emptiness. The third time, I came before sunrise and watched the light hit the windows. Warm gold across scuffed tile. Enough space for a pastry case. Enough room behind glass for customers to see work with their own eyes. Visibility, the exact thing my family had once said I had no right to claim. I signed anyway. Not because I felt brave, because fear and desire had finally become the same size. The pen felt slippery in my hand. The monthly payment looked obscene. The bank manager shook my hand like we were equals in a language I still distrusted. Lila cried when I told her. I laughed at that. Then nearly cried myself when I saw the first invoice for renovations. But when the keys landed in my palm, cold and heavier than they looked, I felt something I had not let myself feel in years. One clean exhale, a dangerous one. Because now I had a real address, real debt, real staff, real windows for the world to look through, and a real chance to lose everything in public. The shop opened on a Tuesday and didn't stop moving for 6 days. That first week felt like living inside a bell. Everything rang, the new espresso machine hissed like an animal finding its place. Fresh paint still clung faintly beneath the smell of browned butter and coffee grounds. The pastry case threw warm light over rows of fruit tarts, cardamom buns, lacquered pain suisse, and the kui namen that had accidentally become our signature because one photograph decided they deserved a line. Open kitchen. Marble bench. Proofing cabinet humming by the back wall. I had built the room so customers could see the labor my family used to call shame. Folding, glazing, scoring. The whole beautiful, exhausting honesty of it. Lila moved through the chaos like she'd been born in it. calling orders, wiping tables, fixing my mistakes before I admitted them. Mateo had joined by then too, all fast wrists and dry jokes, able to steam milk while insulting me affectionately for forgetting to eat. We were understaffed, overworked, and somehow still making something close to joy. By Friday, local blogs had posted must-try lists. A neighborhood paper ran a photo of me under the sign. The bank sent congratulations with the same greed dressed as enthusiasm it had used for the loan. Wedding inquiries started landing in our inbox. One television producer emailed about a morning feature. I ignored that one for a week because cameras made me itchy. Success arrived in pieces, so practical I almost trusted it. Then my mother walked in carrying lilies. It was just after 11, between the office crowd and the late lunch crowd, that brief soft pocket when the bakery exhaled. Rain lights silvered the front windows. Lila was boxing financiers. Mateo was dialing in a new espresso grind. I was behind the pastry pass brushing apricot glaze over a tray of pear tarts when the room changed in a way I felt before I understood. I looked up. She stood just inside the door in a cream coat with a bouquet of white lilies wrapped in paper. Not supermarket flowers. Florist flowers. The kind people bring to openings, graduations, condolences, milestones, respectable enough to witness. For one stupid second, my body reacted before my mind did. My chest lifted, like a child hearing his name called from the audience. Then memory caught up and turned the air thin. She looked smaller than I remembered, not weak, refined into something tighter. Her hair was shorter, her lipstick softer. But there was that same careful posture, the same way she held expensive things as if they proved belonging. And on her wrist, hidden partly by her cuff, the pearl bracelet flashed once when she adjusted the flowers. Leela glanced at me from the register. You know her? Too many answers fit inside that question. Yes, I said. My mother stepped closer to the counter. Her eyes moved over the room first. The tiles, the menu board, the brass lamps over the pastry case. The open kitchen where laminated dough rested under linen. The sourdough loaves cooling on racks. She took it all in with such visible care that it almost looked like reverence. It's beautiful, she said. Not hello. Not, how have you been, beautiful. I hate how much that mattered to me. Mateo, sensing weather, vanished into the back with a milk crate that did not need moving. Leela pretended to reorganize takeaway cups and listened with the concentration of a person trying not to look like she's listening. The bakery had gone subtly quieter. Customers always notice when a private current enters a public room. What are you doing here? I asked. My mother gave a small, embarrassed smile, the one she used to wear when relatives praised my grades too extravagantly. I came to see the flowers. She set them gently on the counter. Lilies against polished stone. White petals, yellow pollen, green stems wet from the florist's sleeve. I remembered every ceremony I had attended without her bringing me anything. Congratulations, she said. Then, to my horror, her eyes filled. It wasn't dramatic crying, no collapse, no performance I could reject cleanly. Just tears gathering as if the room had opened something in her she hadn't expected to feel. She touched the edge of the counter with her fingertips. I should have come sooner. I said nothing because silence was safer. She looked around again, and this time there was no mistaking the awe in it. You built all this. There are sentences. You wait so long to hear that by the time they arrive, they no longer fit where you imagined putting them. I wanted to be hard, measured, untouched. Instead, I heard myself say, yes. She nodded quickly, swallowing. Your father. She stopped. Chose a cleaner route. He was too proud to admit he was wrong. Wrong. Not monstrous. Not cruel. Not unforgivable. Wrong. As if we were discussing directions taken on a long drive, but still. It was something. My body betrayed me again, shoulders easing, breath returning. That old hunger, the one I thought had bled out in the service alley years before, sat up in me like it had only been sleeping. I told myself to be careful. I asked if she wanted coffee. That was my first surrender. She took tea instead. Earl Grey, no sugar. Same as always. Leela brought it to a corner table with professional politeness sharpened by suspicion. My mother thanked her too warmly, which made Leela trust her less, not more. I joined my mother only after washing my hands twice, buying myself 30 extra seconds at the sink. Up close, she smelled of jasmine and rain. I heard about the article, she said. Your aunt sent it to everyone. Of course she had. Success makes families rediscover postal routes, and the television people. She gave a small laugh. Suddenly, everyone says they always knew you had talent. I looked at her over the steam of my coffee. Did you? She lowered her eyes. Skillful move, whether intentional or not. I knew you were serious, she said. I didn't understand what serious would become. Not an apology, a softer substitute. Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. She showed me a photo I had not seen. My sister, smiling in an engagement, ring lifted toward the camera. Family gathered around her. My mother on one side, my father on the other. The frame complete in the exact shape that had excluded me. She's engaged. I asked. My mother brightened through the sadness as if grateful for safer ground. 3 months now. We wanted to tell you properly. Wanted another careful lie too small to challenge without making myself the difficult one. Congratulations to her. She misses you. That one? I believed. My mother wrapped both hands around her tea. We're trying to do things better. I almost laughed. Trying is such a beautiful word for people who still want credit before damage is named. But she looked tired. Truly tired. And the shop around us glowed with the life I had built. It did something to the balance of power. I was no longer standing in their hallway with a trash bag. She was sitting in my bakery under my lights, beside my flowers, asking to remain. I don't know what better means, I said. She nodded as if she had expected that. Small? It can mean small. Then she told me what she'd really come for. My sister's engagement party was in 2 weeks. Family only. Plus a few close family friends. Nothing to public, nothing press-worthy. Just a chance, she said, to begin again without making a show of it. Would I come? Could I let her introduce me properly this time? Could we try being in one room as family again? The word family landed on the table between us like something fragile and stolen. I should have asked whether my father wanted me there. I should have asked why this invitation came only after newspaper clippings and full reservations. I should have remembered the cake in the trash. Instead, I remembered being 18 and watching other boys' mothers clap at ceremonies. I remembered graduation photos where I stood with friends because there was no one else to hold the flowers. I remembered how long I had wanted a doorway to open that did not require me to beg first. What does properly mean? I asked. She smiled then, relieved enough to be almost radiant. It means no side entrances. No secrecy. It means you come in with us. That sentence nearly undid me. There it was. The bait fitted exactly to the wound. She went further. Of course she did. She said relatives had changed. That people were proud now. That the business looked elegant and established and not at all what your father feared. She even asked if we could take a photo together before she left. Just for the family group chat, nothing formal. I agreed to that too. We stood beneath the sign while Leela, with the expression of someone documenting a crime scene, took the picture. In it, my mother is smiling through tears. In it, I am standing too close. She touched my arm before leaving. One more thing. I felt it before she said it. The shift. The practical core inside the softness. Your sister wants you to make the engagement cake. Of course. I leaned back in my chair. For the party, my mother's voice gentled further, almost offended that I might hear anything transactional in it. Who else should make it? It would mean so much. A real gesture, something from your hands. My hands. The same ones once described as wasted. I asked, because some tired adult part of me was still alive. Do you want the family rate or the posted rate? She looked stricken. Perfectly stricken. Oh, sweetheart. She shook her head as if money itself had wounded her. Healing should not come with a bill. There it was. Cleaner than before. Better dressed. The old script with nicer lighting. My whole body knew the answer should be no. No to free labor wrapped as love. No to proving myself through pastry one more time. No to confusing invitation with repair. I knew all of it. Then my mother looked around the bakery again, at the room they had once believed too shameful to imagine, and she said, very softly, let this be a beginning. And the child in me, the one who still wanted his mother to arrive with flowers and mean it, stepped over every warning I had trained into myself. Okay, I said. Lila dropped a stack of saucers in the back. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand like nothing terrible had ever happened between us. Good, she whispered. Good. After she left, the lily stayed on the counter all afternoon. Customers complimented them. Mateo asked no questions. Lila waited until the chairs were up and the last tray was wrapped. Then said, you know that felt bad, right? I kept wiping the same patch of marble. Maybe, I said. She gave me a look so direct it almost belonged to Irena. Maybe isn't the word. I trimmed the lily stems that night and put them in a heavy glass vase near the window. By morning, the pollen had started staining the white petals yellow. I built the cake like a man, trying not to notice he was building an altar. 3 tiers would have been easier, more expected. I made 2 instead, taller and cleaner, with architectural sugar work rising between them like spun glass windows. My sister had asked for elegance. My mother had asked for healing. I gave them precision, so exact it almost felt defensive. Ivory glaze, pistachio sponge, rosewater mousse held in narrow bands, raspberry compote cut sharp enough to balance the sweetness, hand-piped borders so restrained they looked effortless. If you didn't know what effort cost, around the middle tier I wrapped a lattice of pulled sugar ribbons, faintly tinted champagne, catching light with that dangerous half-solid shimmer that can turn from beautiful to ruined if the room runs too warm. Leela watched me pack the final components into crates at 3 in the morning. You know you're not sleeping before this, right? I know. She leaned against the prep table, arms folded. And you're still doing it for free? I tightened the lid on the transport box. We've discussed this. No. You avoided this. I didn't answer because she was right and because saying my mother's name in the bakery already felt like bringing dirt inside. Mateo helped load the van anyway. He was careful with the sugar boxes, which told me he understood more than I'd admitted. Before shutting the doors, he said, "If anyone at that party starts acting weird, call me. I don't care if I'm in pajama pants." I laughed at that. Real laugh. It made leaving harder. The engagement hall was not the rented community room from years before. This was money trying to look effortless. Chandeliers with warm dimmers, cream linen, mirrored plinths, floral arrangements tall enough to block honest sight lines, the kind of place where staff glide instead of walk, and every tray appears from behind a drape as if by magic. I arrived through the front entrance this time. My mother had kept that promise. A coordinator met me with a headset and false calm. "We're so excited," she said, though she had no idea who I was except the man carrying 6 boxers labeled fragile. I assembled the cake in a side prep room beside trays of canapes and buckets of flowers. Sugar work last. Always last. My hands stayed steady because they had to. There is mercy in technical labor. It narrows the world. When I rolled the finished cake into the ballroom, conversations thinned without stopping. Heads turned. The sugar ribbons caught the chandelier light and sent small amber glints across the mirrored table. Even I had to admit it looked expensive in the exact language my family respected. My sister saw it first. Her hand flew to her mouth. This time with joy. "It's beautiful," she whispered when I reached her. "You made this." Not because she doubted my skill, because seeing your brother's work stand at the center of a room like that can scramble older stories. "I made it," I said. She hugged me carefully, avoiding the sugar work, and for 1 second I let myself enjoy it. Her perfume, her shaking shoulders, the simple fact of being touched by family without being pushed away. Then relatives started arriving, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who had watched me be erased and now approached with bright eyes and the shameless confidence of people who believe success resets their own memory. They surrounded the cake first, then me, asking flavors, asking business questions, asking if I shipped nationwide, if I taught classes, if I'd considered opening uptown. 2 women who once called me the difficult son introduced me to their friends as our pastry genius. I smiled so hard my jaw ached. That is the humiliating part no one admits. Sometimes being used feels enough like being wanted that your body cooperates. My mother glided from group to group with a hand at my elbow, steering introductions, making sure the right people connected my face to the cake and the cake to the bakery. She had dressed in deep blue this time. The pearl bracelet shone whenever she lifted her glass. She kept saying things like, "He's done so well," and "We always knew he had a creative side," and "Family talent comes out in surprising ways." Each sentence was almost true. That made them harder to fight. My father arrived late, which was apparently now part of his mythology. Important men enter after the room has ripened. He crossed the ballroom shaking hands, kissed my sister's forehead, nodded at the cake, then looked at me with the measured neutrality of a man about to unveil a revised public stance. "Impressive," he said. 1 word. From him, it landed like a bribe. "Thank you," I said, and hated myself for meaning it. During photos, the photographer kept rearranging us into versions of harmony. Sister and fiance by the cake. Parents at either side. Then, "Brother, come in." My mother lit up. My father didn't object. Flash. Another. We stood shoulder to shoulder under soft light while guests watched and accepted the image. Being manufactured in real time. I should have left then. Instead, I stayed for the toasts. The ballroom glittered. Champagne towers. Gold cutlery, a quartet in the corner trying to make old songs sound expensive. Waiters moved between tables with saffron risotto and sea bass under silver covers. My cake sat untouched on its mirrored stand, sugar architecture glowing like a lie that had learned table manners. My father took the microphone after the fiancé's parents spoke. He began well, too well. Gratitude, family, blessings, the usual polished phrases, burnished by years of community respectability. Then he shifted toward my sister and her future, and from there, effortlessly toward the family itself, its values, its discipline, its standards. I felt the change before the rest of the room did. He looked across the tables and found me in the third row near the side curtain. A soft smile. The kind men use when they are about to credit themselves with another person's scars. People see success, he said, lifting his glass, and they think it appears from nowhere. Some guests laughed politely. But in our family, we believe in structure. We believe in standards. Children do not always enjoy that while growing up. More laughter. Sometimes they call it pressure. Sometimes rebellion. Sometimes, he glanced at me again. Tough love. The room leaned with him. I stopped breathing. He continued, easy as silk. And yet, with God's grace and strict parenting, even a rebellious boy can become a disciplined entrepreneur. Applause. Actual applause. The sound hit me like heat from an oven door. Not because strangers clapped, because some of them knew enough, had heard versions of the story, and still accepted this cleaner one because it made dinner easier. My father raised his glass toward me, to our son, whose talent found direction. More applause. I don't remember standing. I only remember suddenly being on my feet with blood pounding in my ears and my sister looking at me as if she knew, too late, exactly what trap had been set. My mother was smiling at the head table, but the smile had a strain in it now, a plea under the lacquer. Don't ruin this. Not here. There it was again. My old job. Preserve the room. Swallow the damage. Let the version with better lighting win. Instead, I turned and walked behind the side curtain into the service corridor. I heard the applause continuing even after I disappeared. That was the poison of it. The room didn't crack. The room absorbed my absence and kept celebrating. My mother found me by the prep station where the caterers were slicing citrus for the bar. She came fast, heels sharp on the tile, whispering my name like a warning flare. Please don't do this. I laughed once. Ugly sound. Do what? Leave before he takes credit for the deadbolt too. She looked over her shoulder toward the ballroom. Applause still bleeding through the curtain. Clinking glasses. Music beginning again. Her face changed. Not softer. More urgent. He shouldn't have said it like that. Like what? Fiction. Lower your voice. That told me everything. Even now, presentation first. I stepped back from her. You said, start small. You said, family again. We are trying. No, I said, you are staging. Her eyes filled, but they did not weaken her. They sharpened her. Desperation was coming into focus, and at last it had somewhere practical to go. Listen to me, she said. I need you to stay calm because there is something else. There it was. Finally, the real room inside the room. She pulled me farther down the service corridor, away from the catering staff pretending not to hear, past stacks of folded linens and an unplugged chocolate fountain. The music dimmed behind the curtain. Her hands shook as she opened her handbag and took out a thick envelope. Documents, bank printouts, letters with official logos. I didn't touch them. The tutoring business is under investigation, she said. My body went still in the way it does before impact. What? It's a tax issue, a filing issue. It will be sorted. But in the meantime, accounts are frozen and people are saying things they don't understand. Her words sped up, colliding. If this spreads now, your sister's engagement could collapse. The families will panic. Her fiancé's parents are already asking questions. We only need a bridge, a temporary show of stability. I looked at the envelope. Why are you telling me this here? Because your father wouldn't listen sooner and because we are out of time. Out of time. Of course. She pushed the papers toward me. The bank will move if you co-sign. Your bakery has equity. Real equity. They said with your name attached. I stepped back as if the envelope were hot. No wonder she had brought lilies. No wonder I was in the family photo. No wonder I had been paraded beside sugarwork and chandeliers while relatives practiced saying entrepreneur instead of embarrassment. I wasn't a restored son. I was collateral. My mother saw the understanding hit and reached for me. Voice dropping into that intimate register meant to make selfishness sound like duty. It's temporary. Just until this settles. legal protection, emergency financing. We help the family now, quietly, and later. No one even needs to know. Quietly, meaning lie for us again. I put your business in this room, I said. You put me in this room for the bank. She flinched, but not because I was wrong. Your sister has done nothing, she said. Do not punish her for your father. That landed because it was chosen to land. If I refuse, I said, you say I abandoned family. Her silence confirmed it better than words. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a knife tapped a champagne glass for the next round of speeches. My cake waited in that room like an accomplice. I looked at my mother, really looked, and saw no apology hiding behind the tears. Only need. Acute, polished need. She had crossed my bakery floor on her knees in public months later, but the begging began here, in silk and chandelier light. Under the applause my father had wrung from a lie. Does my sister know? I asked. She knows. We're under pressure. Not enough. I felt suddenly, viscerally tired. Not of work. Work I understood. Tired of being invited only when my labor could disguise a fracture. My mother tried one more time. Stay tonight, smile. We will talk tomorrow with the accountant. Don't humiliate us by leaving now. There it was again. Humiliate us. As if that was the oldest wound in the room. I took off the family boutonniere someone had pinned to my lapel for photographs and set it on top of the envelope in her hands. Then I walked past her, through the prep room, out the service exit, and into the parking lot without waiting to see whether anyone stopped me. I left before the cake was cut. Let them explain that. Let them photograph the empty space beside my sister. Let them answer the guests when the baker vanished from his own masterpiece. By the time I reached my van, my phone was already vibrating with calls. I didn't answer. The first voicemail from my mother began with my name. The second began with, please be reasonable. The third began with, if this gets out. By the time the engagement photos hit family group chats, the tutoring business was already burning. At first, the scandal moved in whispers. A delayed payroll, parents demanding refunds, a landlord locked change at one branch. Then it broke open the way rotten wood does all at once. After years of looking polished from the outside, former employees posted screenshots. A local forum picked up tax complaints. Someone leaked a notice with my father's company name on it. By Monday, people were using words like fraud with the bright appetite strangers bring to other people's collapse. My mother called 11 times in one day. I answered none of them. I told myself that silence was clarity, that whatever happened next belonged to the life they had built without me. I had proofing schedules, vendor calls, payroll to run, wedding consults stacked through spring, and a second shop plan waiting on the edge of being real. There were mornings I managed to mean it. Then my sister called from a number I didn't know, and I picked up because some part of me had been waiting years for that exact weakness to ring. She was crying too hard to begin cleanly. I had not heard that sound from her since we were children. Can you talk? I stepped out of the bakery and into the alley behind the bins, because the front room was full and I did not want my face seen by customers. The February air smelled like wet cardboard and coffee grounds. Delivery vans hissed at the curb. What happened? Silence, breathing. Then, it's worse than what Mom said. Of course it was. My sister told the story in fragments, ashamed of each one before she reached the next. The tutoring business had not just underpaid taxes. It had borrowed to hide losses, shifted money between branches, delayed salaries, and used new deposits to cover old holes. My father had kept expanding on paper because shrinking would have looked like failure. He had signed things she never saw. He had signed things with her name attached because she was listed as a director on documents she had once agreed to without reading. Back when it was just administrative and family businesses did things informally. My hand tightened around the phone. He used your name. I didn't know, she said quickly. I swear to you, I didn't know what he was doing. I believed that part immediately. Not because she was innocent, because I knew the system she came from. In our family, paperwork handed to younger people came wrapped in trust and pressure so tightly they became the same thing. How bad? A sound left her that wasn't quite a laugh. Do you want the honest version or the one Mom is still trying to sell? The honest one? She inhaled. If they freeze everything, my savings go too. The house too? Maybe the engagement, definitely the business. And there are more debts than anyone told me. More debts. That phrase haunted the next 48 hours. It kept growing. Suppliers unpaid, back rent, personal guarantees, a private lender with ugly terms, an educational software contract they could never afford. Then the worst part, the one that changed my anger from clean refusal into something dirtier. My father had borrowed against my sister's name to maintain appearances long after the business should have closed. 2 centers and admitted losses. He had protected the family image by eating his daughter instead. I went back inside after that call and ruined a tray of brioche because I added salt twice while staring at nothing. Leila took the bowl from my hands without comment and remade the batch. Mateo asked if I needed air. I said no too quickly. That answer always meant yes. The next day, the first reporter came into the bakery pretending to want coffee. Not for me, for comments, for local color. There's been discussion online connecting your family to E began. And Leila cut him off with such cold efficiency that he left without his Americano. By then, even my staff knew enough to hear the tremor under every vendor call. Still, I did not call my mother back. I kept thinking of the engagement hall. Of my father with a microphone and a lie polished so smooth people applauded it. Of my mother's hand on my wrist while she slid loan papers toward me behind the curtain. If I stepped in now, was I helping my sister? Or letting that machinery close over me again? One justified emergency at a time. I was still asking that when she came to the bakery during lunch service and dropped to her knees. Now the loop had closed. Flour on the floor, phones lifted, pearls on her wrist. My name in her mouth as if she still had the right to say it softly. Your father signed everything away, she said. If you don't help, your sister loses the house. I got her off the floor because spectacle enrages me more than pain does. Mateo locked the front door under the pretense of a maintenance issue. Lila refunded 3 furious customers and flipped the sign to closed. The lunch rush banged once on the glass, then drifted away muttering. Inside, the bakery held that ugly stillness that comes after public shame and before private damage. My mother sat at table 3 with untouched water and both hands trembling around a packet of papers she'd wrinkled with sweat. Up close, she looked truly frightened now. Mascara smudged at one corner, hair frizzed by rain. No careful social voice left. 72 hours, she said. That is what they gave us. For what? The house? The accounts? Everything? Her words came fast, collapsing into one another. And your father. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, reorganizing herself by force. He collapsed this morning. I stared at her. Collapsed how? At the lawyer's office. Chest pain, he needs surgery. Not this minute, but soon. The deposit must be made or they'll delay. For 1 second, the room tilted in a way I hated. Because even after everything, the word father still had a corridor into my body. Not a loving one. A wired one. My mother saw it and rushed in. I'm not asking for us. Listen to me. I'm asking for your sister. For the baby. I jerked my head up. What baby? She blinked. Wrong surprise. She had assumed I knew. My sister had a son. 7 months old. She had not told me because the engagement chaos had swallowed everything, and then the scandal had begun, and then shame did what it always does in our family. It made people edit the truth until there was no safe place left to start. I actually had to sit down across the room through the open pass. I could hear Lila and Mateo shaping brioche in deliberate silence, pretending not to hear while hearing every third word. Butter slapped wood. Trays slid. Normal work happening inches from my family detonating itself. My mother pushed the papers toward me. Please, just review this, meet the accountant. If you speak to them, things may still be salvageable. Salvageable for who? Her eyes closed. Don't do that. That answer was answer enough. I spread the documents across the prep table because I could not bear to look at them where customers had been eating 20 minutes earlier. Flour dust lifted under the pages. Ledgers, legal notices, hospital estimates, mortgage demands, account freezes. My bakery pen rolled into the margins of their disaster. The contrast made me sick. Some numbers were obvious. Others were hidden under layers of business language meant to delay plain understanding. Debt rearranged as facilities extension, tax liability reframed as assessment discrepancy. Emergency medical deposit bolded and clipped to the front as if bodily urgency could clean the rest. I called my sister from the back office. She answered immediately. This time she did not cry first. She sounded hollow, which was worse. Did Mom come? She's here. A long pause. Then, I'm sorry. That word, finally, from the right mouth. And all it did was make me sad. For what? I asked. For all of it. For the cake. For the years. For not calling when I should have. She inhaled. Shaky. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would settle. I thought if I kept peace, I'd still have somewhere to go. There it was. The sentence beneath all the others. Somewhere to go. I knew that sentence in my bones. She had made the opposite choice from mine, but from the same wound. I left and lost home. She stayed and let home feed on her installments. Why didn't you warn me? I asked. Because every time I almost did, Dad would say, you wanted to humiliate us. Mom would say, give it time. And if I pushed too hard, she stopped. I was scared they'd cut me off too. I leaned back against the office wall and shut my eyes. That was the perspective shift I had been resisting. I had spent years treating the family as a single weapon pointed at me. I wasn't wrong exactly. But weapons have handles. And sometimes the people gripping them are also bleeding. Not equally. Not innocently. But bleeding. When did you find out about the documents in your name? I asked. After the engagement. Her voice cracked on the word. His lawyer said if I didn't sign one more extension, the whole thing would become visible. I refused. That's when everything sped up. Visible again. Always the real terror. I went back to the prep table and looked at the ledgers with different eyes. Not softer, clearer. My mother was not here because love had won. She was here because the machine had finally run out of children to consume quietly. Me first by expulsion. My sister, later by compliance. Maybe even my mother in ways I had never cared to ask. The ticking clock was now ugly enough to be real. A house seizure in 72 hours. A medical deposit, frozen savings. My nephew tied to a collapse he could not name. My staff in the next room depending on me not to torch the business that paid them. My own expansion fund, sitting in accounts I'd built from pre-dawn shifts and burnt forearms and every insult my family once called practical wisdom. Vengeance would have been simple. Close the folder, call security. Let consequences land where they were earned. Mercy without terms would have been simpler still if I were willing to betray myself all over again and call it blood. I was not. I looked at my mother. She looked older than she had that morning. Smaller too. But I had finally learned that smallness is not the same as innocence. I will not sign anything today, I said. Her face fell so fast it almost made me cruel. Then, I'm not finished. She went silent. I'll review everything. Every account. Every debt. I want the accountant's full file, not your summary. I want the hospital estimate. I want proof of what is in my sister's name and what isn't, and I choose the lawyer. My mother stared as if I had begun speaking another language. You're helping? I hated how badly she wanted the word yes. I'm finding out the truth. I said, what happens after that depends on what the truth costs. For the first time all day, she had no script ready. Outside the office, the mixer started again. Dough turning. Time moving, my bakery breathing around us while my family waited to see whether I would let them inside the walls I had built to survive them. I picked up the accountant's card from the flour-dusted table and told her to call him back. The accountant arrived at my bakery with 2 laptops, a legal pad, and the expression of a man who had already rehearsed how to say disaster without drama. We met before sunrise because that was the only hour my life and theirs could overlap without customers filming it. The front lights stayed off. In the kitchen, proofing baskets lined the rack like sleeping animals. Flour hung in the air from the first brioche mix. Lila and Mateo worked at the far bench in deliberate quiet, stretching dough and pretending not to hear the words that mattered. The accountant's name was Mr. Vora, mid-50s, clean shirt, cheap tie. Exhaustion burned into the folds beside his mouth. He had the politeness of someone who knew facts were about to do violence. He opened the files on my prep table while I stood there in an apron with dry flour cracked into the lines of my knuckles. This is the plain version, he said. There are 3 separate problems. Tax exposure, fraudulent borrowing, personal guarantees tied to your sister's directorship. My mother sat on a stool by the wall, hands clenched so hard the pearl bracelet dug into her skin. For once, she did not interrupt. Mr. Vora laid it out piece by piece. The tax issue alone might have been survivable with payment plans and penalties. Ugly, but survivable. The fraudulent borrowing was worse. My father had shifted liabilities across entities, obscured losses, and secured loans using documents my sister signed without informed consent. That moved the whole thing from shame into legal danger. Not just for him. For her. If the wrong parties pushed, she could be tied to it for years before proving ignorance. And the only way to separate her cleanly, I asked, Mr. Vora met my eyes. Immediate settlement of the most urgent liabilities, plus a sworn affidavit detailing who authorized what, when, and without whose knowledge. The words landed like metal. An affidavit meant names, dates, documents, truth, formal enough to wound in public. My mother finally spoke. There must be another way. There was, Mr. Vora said evenly. 6 months ago. Silence. I looked at the printed numbers. My second shop fund sat in my mind like a room already built. I'd been saving toward it for 2 years. Extra wedding commissions, no salary raises for myself, repair instead of replace. Every cardamom bun sold before sunrise had a little piece of that future in it. I'd already found a possible location, not signed, but close. Close enough that Lila and I sometimes joked about what color the tiles would be. How much I asked. He told me. I didn't react outwardly. That's one of the uglier things survival teaches you. Not calm, freeze. It was not enough to destroy me entirely. It was enough to kill the second shop. The bakery timer went off behind me. Mateo crossed the kitchen, pulled a tray of morning buns, and retreated without looking our way. The smell of brown sugar and orange zest filled the room just as Mr. Vora slid the hospital deposit estimate toward me. And this, your father's surgery deposit, he said. Urgent, but not as urgent as the legal exposure. However, delay raises risk. Of course it did. Everything had ripened into maximum pressure at once. House accounts, surgery, my sister, her child, my business, my future. My mother leaned forward. If you help us quietly, we can handle the rest internally. I looked at her internally, without the affidavit. Mr. Vora made a small, tired sound through his nose. Not quite a laugh. More like a man hearing denial dressed as strategy. My mother's voice sharpened. We don't need to destroy the family name. There it was. Even now, the house could fall. The business could rot. Her daughter could be dragged through litigation. Her husband could need a surgeon. But the family name remained, in her mind, an organ to protect. I asked the accountant the question that had been grinding at me since the service corridor. If I pay quietly and no affidavit is filed, is my sister safe? He didn't soften it. No. Even if the urgent debts are covered, no. My mother looked between us as if truth had suddenly become an act of cruelty. Why are you making this so absolute? Because it is absolute, he said. Without formal disclosure, the existing paper trail still implicates her. I stood there listening to him say what I had already known in my bones. Help without truth would not save my sister. It would only save the story. And I was done feeding that. I went to the hospital that afternoon because my mother said my father wanted to speak to me directly. I almost refused. Then I pictured him letting lawyers and pride do all his speaking while my sister drowned in paperwork under his name, and I decided I wanted to hear his version from the bed where consequence had finally pinned him still. Hospitals erase status better than any courtroom. He looked smaller in the gown. Not pitiful, stripped, 4-line tape to the back of one hand. Gray in his face I had never seen before. The television was on mute. A paper cup of untouched broth sat by the bed. When he saw me, his jaw tightened before anything softer could get there. You took your time. No, hello. I stayed by the foot of the bed. The accountant explained enough. My father shifted, winced, and covered it with irritation. Your mother panics. Things are being exaggerated. I actually laughed at that. He hated the sound. Don't disrespect me in here. In here. He looked toward the door, making sure we were alone. Families survive by handling problems as family, not by inviting outsiders into our mess. He meant affidavits, lawyers, records, reality. You invited banks into it. I said, you invited my sister's name into it. You invited the government into it. But truth is where you draw the line. His face hardened. Even on a hospital bed, he reached first for authority. What happened in our house happened because you forced it. You were determined to throw away your future. I did what fathers do. There it was. No apology even now. Not after collapse. Not with a monitor ticking beside him and my sister's life hanging off forged stability. He still needed exile to have been leadership. The same hands you threw out are the ones you want to sign now. I said. His eyes flashed. Don't be theatrical. If you have done well, it is because hardship corrected you. Corrected? I understood then that there are people who would rather die inside their story than live outside it, honestly. He lowered his voice. Pay what is needed. Quietly. Protect the family. That is what loyalty looks like. I stared at him long enough for the silence to grow ugly. No, I said. For the first time, fear cracked through his anger. Just a line of it. Thin and bright, you're my son. Not an admission. A summons. I left before I answered, because there are moments when anything you say gets used as rope. Back at the bakery, morning service had become afternoon prep. Doughs resting. Stock simmering. Leela sat on an overturned crate in the office with the second shop projections spread across her lap because she had been pricing shelving. She looked up when I came in and read my face before I spoke. No second location, I said. She held still, then slowly set the papers down. How bad? I sat opposite her and told her enough. Not all, just enough for honesty. Her eyes flicked to the projections once, then back to me. What do you need from me? That question nearly broke me. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking where to stand when the floor moved. That is what staff becomes if you lead long enough. Not employees only. Witnesses with rent due. I need you to keep this place steady for 2 days, I said. No gossip, no panic. And if I have to pull money, we freeze all non-essential spending. She nodded once, no flinch, no resentment. Just adjustment. That night, I called the lawyer I trusted most. A woman named Denise who had handled our lease battle with the landlord and once described hidden fees as petty fraud in a nice blazer. She read the documents until midnight and called me back with no softness in her voice. Mr. Vora is right. Quiet payment protects the parents, not the daughter. And if I file, then the lie dies. Publicly, I stood in the dark bakery with my phone pressed to my ear, watching the reflection of racks in the window glass. Somewhere behind me, Irena's rolling pin hung above the apprentice station like a judge with no interest in sentiment. If I wire the money, I asked, can it be limited? Yes, Denise said. We ring-fence it. Only enough to shield your sister's exposure, secure essential medical treatment, and stop the immediate seizure that traps her and the child. Nothing for image management. Nothing for vanity debt. Vanity debt, that phrase hit exactly right. The next morning, I went to the bank between proofing cycles. I still remember every physical detail, the way my hands smelled faintly of egg wash under the sanitizer, the way flour had dried into white crescents around my nails, the way the bank office air conditioning felt too cold after the bakery heat. My expansion account sat on the screen in quiet, devastating digits. Years of discipline arranged into a number I had treated like a promise. The manager spoke gently, the way people do when they sense both opportunity and grief and don't care which one pays. I authorized the transfer in parts, legal settlement, medical deposit, escrow to stop the seizure long enough to untangle the directorship. Each amount carved a room out of the future and handed it elsewhere. By the last signature, my hands had stopped trembling. Not because it hurt less, because pain had become procedural. From the bank, I went straight to Denise's office carrying the unsigned letter of intent for the second location and the key packet the agent had given me after our last viewing, still sealed in a small envelope because I had wanted to save the feeling of opening it. I set both on her desk. I'm not moving forward, I said. She looked at the envelope, then at me. She understood at once. Do you want a minute? No. If I took a minute, I might try to make the loss prettier than it was. We drafted the affidavit that afternoon. Not emotional language. Not family language, dates, transfers, signatures, directorship, misrepresentation, unauthorized borrowing, false accounting entries. It was colder than any argument we had ever had at home. Colder and truer. Halfway through, Denise asked if I needed a break. I said no. My mother called 4 times while we worked. I silenced everyone when I finally answered. It was only to tell her the money had been arranged. She burst into tears. Thank God. And the affidavit is filing in 1 hour. Her crying stopped like a switch had been hit. No, yes, you promised to help. I am helping. Not like this. Her voice rose, stripped raw. You'll ruin us. I looked at the legal statement in front of me, at the lines that separated my sister from my father's choices, and understood that ruin had happened long before paperwork admitted it. I'm not ruining you, I said. I'm ending your version. She whispered my name as if it still had leverage. Then, when that failed, she reached for the oldest knife. After everything we've lost, you would do this to your own family. I signed on the line before answering. I am doing this for the family members you used. The affidavit filed, the money wired. The second shop dream died without ceremony. There was no music, no speech. Just email confirmations, stamped copies, and an unclaimed envelope of keys left on Denise's desk beside a dying plant. By evening, the first calls had already begun. Relatives, blocked numbers. One local reporter, my father twice from the hospital. I answered only once. His voice was ice now. No weakness left in it. You chose strangers over blood. I leaned against my office door, exhausted beyond anger. No, I said. I chose blood over your story. He hung up. That was the point of no return. Not the transfer. Not the hospital. Not even the lost shop. The point of no return was truth made official. After that, no one could honestly say I had abandoned them, and no one in my family could ever again pretend they hadn't tried to build their dignity on my silence. The strangest part was how ordinary the bakery looked the next morning. I had expected some visible mark, a crack in the tiles, a blown fuse, a dark stain where the future had leaked out. Instead, the proofing cabinet hummed like always. The espresso grinder coughed awake at 6, butter softened on trays by the pastry bench. Outside, dawn spread over the front window in a pale wash that made the laminated pastries look almost unreal. Inside me, an entire second bakery had been demolished. Outside, we still had to open at 7. That is one of the few mercies of work done by hand. It does not care that your inner life has collapsed. Dough still needs folding. Cream still needs whipping before it turns. Bread still asks the same old question every morning. Did you come back? I did. For weeks, I moved through the shop with the particular exhaustion that follows a correct decision. No one applauds. Customers complimented the spring menu. Couples booked wedding tastings. A food site listed us among the best bakeries in the city. None of it put the second location back in my account. None of it made my chest stop tightening when I passed the street where that future had almost lived. I still looked at empty storefronts. That took a while to stop. The fallout came in uneven waves. My father survived the surgery. Of course, that was the first thing people asked me, as if survival were a moral verdict instead of a medical outcome. The surgery went well. Recovery was slower than he expected and less dignified than he liked. He came home thinner, weaker, and furious at the size of the world, without his old authority in it. The business was gone. The public affidavit had made denial impossible. Community respect did what it always does. When scandal becomes inconvenient, it thinned. Quietly calls slowed, invitations dried up. Men who once praised his discipline suddenly remembered they had concerns. He never thanked me. He never apologized either. The closest he came was one message. Months later, sent through my sister because he still preferred witnesses between us. It said, "Tell him I am alive." I read it once and deleted it. My mother called for a while after the filing. At first in tears, then in anger, then in that thin, practical voice she used when emotion had failed and she hoped logistics might still get obedience done. She wanted updates, clarifications, help understanding why certain relatives were no longer responding, help with paperwork, help with hospital follow-ups, help always, without the price of admitting what that help had already cost. When it became clear I would not restore the old script of silence, she stopped. Not dramatically, no final curse, no last scene. She just stopped. One day there were 3 missed calls. Then one text about medication receipts. Then nothing. I would be lying if I said that silence didn't hurt. Even after everything, some childish nerve in me kept expecting one impossible message. Not need. Not strategy. Something simple and devastating and late. I was wrong. People do not always become truthful just because truth finally becomes expensive. My sister did. That was enough to change the shape of the whole ruin. The first transfer she sent me was $43. 43, not round. Not symbolic, just what she could spare after rent. Baby formula, legal cleanup, and the smaller life that remained once the family performance budget was gone. The memo line said, "Starting." I stared at that number longer than I had stared at sums 1,000 times larger. Then I cried in my office with the door locked because honest money has a way of exposing every counterfeit tenderness that came before it. She kept sending the transfers, small ones, sometimes 43, sometimes 80, once just 15, with a text saying, "Bad month. More next time." I never asked her to hurry. The point was not reimbursement. The point was that, for the first time in our lives, money moved between us without theater, guilt, or family mythology attached. My nephew came with her eventually. The first time she brought him to the bakery, he was still small enough to sleep through the grinder and wake furious at the steamer. Round cheeks, serious eyes, a cowlick that refused every attempt at order. He sat in a high chair by the office and slapped the table every time Mateo made foam art. Leela taught him to wave at the bread racks. The whole staff fell in love too fast. Children do that to a room if the room is decent. By then, I had made another choice. No spreadsheet would have recommended. Since the second shop was gone, I took the storage area at the back of the bakery and converted part of it into an apprenticeship station. Not a school. Not a charity project dressed up for grants. A real paid pathway. Small and stubborn. For kids and young adults who had talent in their hands, but families who only respected talent once it wore a tie. We started with 2 benches, 1 extra mixer, and a schedule built around the production we already had. Laminated dough on Tuesdays, bread shaping on Thursdays, cake finishing on Saturdays after service. Resumes if they wanted them. Knife safety whether they wanted it or not. Conversations over cooling racks about cost control, burns, contracts, and the lies people tell about respectable work. I hung Irena's rolling pin above the station where everyone could see it. Not in a glass case, not as a shrine. On a plain, wooden peg with enough room around it to breathe, the burn mark near the center still visible. The handles still dark from years of use. When the first apprentice asked whose it was, I said, "Someone who knew butter has a memory." That became enough. The bakery changed because of them. Not cleaner, not easier, more alive. More arguments over proofing times. More questions. More badly folded croissants that had to be done again and again and again. More young faces arriving with the same fear I must have worn at 18, that if they chose what they loved with their hands, someone important would call them waste. Here, nobody got to say that without being corrected. Lila took naturally to training. Mateo pretended he hated it, then spent 40 minutes teaching one nervous kid how to steam milk without screaming the pitcher across the room. Hassan even came by once, ate taku and almond for free, and told one apprentice she scaled flour less like a criminal than I used to. That was as close to blessing as he offered. The bakery never became the empire some articles predicted. No sleek chain, no airport outpost, no glossy cookbook shot in linen light. We kept one shop, one hard-won solvent. Busy, imperfect shop. We repaired the proofer instead of replacing it. Negotiated butter like diplomats at war. Said no to growth when growth smelled too much like vanity debt in a nicer suit. And slowly, almost against my will, one shop began to feel like enough. Not because the second dream hadn't mattered, because this one had become a home. Years later, on a cold morning before sunrise, my sister dropped my nephew off while she went to an early shift. He was old enough then to ask difficult questions and young enough to trust the answers. The city was still blue with pride on. Inside the bakery, the lights were low and kind. Loaves sat proofing under linen. The air smelled of yeast, citrus zest, and the first coffee Lila had started before heading to the front. My nephew stood on an upturned crate at the bench in a tiny apron we had to roll twice at the waist. "Can I do the braid?" he asked. His hands were still clumsy, too eager. He pressed harder than the dough needed, then looked at me in panic when the strand tore a little at the edge. I almost said, "It's fine." Instead, I heard Irena again. I told him gently. He frowned. "I messed it up. That's part of it." I showed him how to roll with lighter palms, how to let the dough lengthen instead of forcing it, how to cross the strands without strangling them. He copied me with his tongue poking from one corner of his mouth, fierce with concentration. The second braid was crooked. The third was better. By the fourth, his hands had found the rhythm, and the dough lay under them like something willing. Dawn reached the front windows, then that same pale gold I had watched years ago in the empty shell of my first real bakery. It touched the flour on the bench, the racks of proofing loaves, the rolling pin above the apprentice's station, my nephew's bent head over the braid. He looked up at me. "Is this hard?" I smiled despite myself. "Yes." "Then why do you like it?" "Because it fed me. Because it saved me. Because no one could call these hands wasted and still mean it. Because a life built from butter and heat and repetition had held more truth than the family name ever did." But he was a child, and the right answer was simpler. "Because you can make something good," I said, "and then share it." He nodded as if that settled the whole world. Maybe, for him, it could. I slid the tray into the prover and watched the dough begin its slow, invisible rise. Not first, not second. The rise after handling. After collapse. After being worked over and still choosing to become. I used to think the victory would be hearing my mother beg. It wasn't. The victory was this room, this light, these benches. Apprentices laughing in the back. Honest money hitting my account in small transfers. My sister walking in through the front door with no lies left to carry. A child learning before sunrise that hands are not something to be ashamed of. They are how you build shelter, how you feed people, how you tell the truth when words have been corrupted by family for too long. No one here gets thrown out for loving the wrong thing. If that meant something to you, stay a while. There's more truth where this came from.